Hello and welcome. My name is Kim and I am part of the curator team of Escape Routes Bangkok Biennale 2020. Thank you all for joining us today. We're delighted to have Dane Mitchell. Hello, Dane, one of the artists presented at BAB, to be in conversation with us this afternoon. To briefly introduce Dane, his practice really very much speculates on what is material and explores systems of knowledge or belief and people's experiences of them, often dealing with the way things transform or transmit and the presence of material forces, both seen and unseen. In his works, invisible phenomena are translated into tangible forms, whether as sculptural matter and images or as sensory experiences, teasing out potential for objects, senses, and ideas occupy fleeting moments of time. To foreground the lived experience of the material and immaterial, which forms the fundamental building blocks of our knowledge of the world, and allowing them to appear and disappear, and perhaps to be recalled in different times and contexts. And this aspect of Dane's practice really appealed and drew me, really. And I didn't know Dane before we worked on the Biennale. I saw his presentation at the 58th Venice Biennale, during which Dane represented Aotearoa, New Zealand, in 2019, and was very drawn to the project that he presented there, and then subsequently had a conversation with Dane and was very pleased that he accepted the invitation to be part of the Biennale. Dane has been shown very widely as in solo exhibitions, presented as solo exhibitions, and he has also participated in a number of biennales across the world, including Australia, Europe, the United Kingdom, and Asia. Now, for a decade or more, perhaps, now Dane has been exploring the potential of fragrance as a sculptural material in his practice. And then we are very delighted that he accepted the invitation to be in the Biennale, and to also present a new work titled Respiratory Event, Vapourise, which is situated at the rooftop of Bangkok, which we will hear more about later. We hope you all also had the chance to experience the work. As for me, truly phenomenal. Also, even though I was, looking at it remotely. I also like to take this opportunity to thank Creative New Zealand, Toi Aotearoa, and the New Zealand Embassy in Thailand for their support of Dane's participation in Bangkok Biennale. Today, we will begin with a sharing by Dane, who will speak about his practice and also the work that presented at the Biennale. And then for the second part of today's sessions, we'll open up to more fluid conversations, and hopefully you have questions and that we will be very happy to respond to. So if you are tuning in, you have questions or comments, please feel free to post them using the Q&A function that's located at the bottom of the window. Now, Dane, shall I hand it on to you so you can, share with us a bit more about some of your previous projects, also about the project and the process, perhaps, that of us working together with the BAB team on the new work.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kim, for the introduction, and kia ora, and hello to everybody out there watching this. I'm in Aotearoa, New Zealand, in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. It's 11 p.m. here. I've just had a cup of coffee, so I should be, with you, I hope, in some, cognizant way. Yes, I'd like to also thank some people. I'd like to thank Creative New Zealand for their support, and the New Zealand Embassy in Thailand, who were incredibly helpful and communicative and responsive and working with me to realize the project. And I'd also really like to thank Kim, not just for your introduction, Kim, but also for your engagement with my work through this process, and to also thank Jude and the team on the ground in Bangkok. It's certainly an extraordinary time that we will find ourselves in, and to make the work, freight the work, install the work, all remotely, meant that it involved a lot of people. And I can't thank you enough, all of you on the ground in Bangkok, with making it happen, and your patience in doing so as well. So thank you wholeheartedly for that. I talked with Kim about how we should perhaps move forward with this presentation, and it seemed to us that a logical way to work would be to really focus on fragrance, aroma molecules, on perfume, on atmosphere in some sense, in some kind of extended form of material reality that I am interested in and have been working around and with for some time now. I think I made my first work using aroma molecules, perfume, in 2008 into 2009 in Berlin. And so what I suggested that we do is we just perhaps walk through several of these projects. One of them is that initial project, yet represented a couple of years later in Auckland in 2011, and walk you through another couple of projects that also make use of scent and fragrance, which will then lead us into talking about the work in Bangkok itself. I will do my best to keep an eye on the time so that there is time for questions. Please feel free to ask anything you like in the Zoom Q&A spot there. I'm happy to try and free up time at the end in order to answer any questions that you might have. Yes, and as Kim mentioned, we hadn't met before working together on this, and it was a really generative process of starting to think about what might be possible for Bangkok. And I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, the conversations started well before there was such a thing as this pandemic that we're now all grappling with, although my thoughts are with actually the rest of the world rather than us, as some of you may be aware or maybe not. We're very lucky here in New Zealand to be actually living quite normally. I'm sorry if that upsets anybody in relation to feeling some kind of sense of disparity in that, but for whatever reason, things are under control here, and we're able to kind of, as I say, go to openings and eat finger food together, which is perhaps a thing that no one else can imagine right now. So yeah, just to talk a little bit about, I think, Kim's introduction of my interests was really on point. And I would just, extend that by saying that one of the things that really interested me in starting to approach aroma is that I think it's a really slippery material. I think it's a really slippery experience, and it's a really slippery material. And what this means is that it opens up a realm of working that is both really generative and also, highly kind of, kind of up for grabs. Talking about, even just trying to describe smells is a very difficult thing, because it's impoverished as a sense, as a bodily sense, and so we're impoverished with the language to describe it, which as an artist I think is a really exciting proposition when you're dealing with a material that's slippery, that crosses boundaries, that sits between experience and material, sort of sits somewhere between material and experience, or like matter and phenomenon. So that to me seems really an exciting proposition. And there's a quote that I'll read. It's very short, by a writer, Xian Xu, in a recent book of his called The Smell of Risk. And I think he really kind of articulately addresses what's so exciting and enticing about the molecular, about the atmosphere, and about the experience in the nose, and why it's so interesting for me as an artist to work in as a space. And he's writing about the denigration of smell and Western aesthetics in particular. And he says, at least since the Enlightenment, smell has been framed as too immersive, imprecise, subjective, interactive, involuntary, material, promiscuous and too ineffable to convey aesthetic experience. And so all of those troubles, all of those problems that it presents to me as a maker of things or of exhibitions or experiences in time, in an exhibition context, all of that kind of difficulty is a really interesting and enticing proposition. It's also not only is it as a sort of slippery material, as I mentioned, it also I think it opens up this possibility for us to think about the unseen as having a really strong presence in our world. That you know, we scientifically we understand the world on a molecular level, and yet we don't see these things. We know them. They're kind of bound up in forms of knowledge and containment through epistemology and scientific kind of theorems, and yet it's somehow the unseen is a kind of seething presence in our world. And I think the unseen has a real visual power. So if we think about, you know, the elephant in the room, the unseen thing or the unsaid thing being a kind of looming presence, and also we could think about the unseen or disappearance to extend that. That disappearance is a strong force, both aesthetically and politically. If we think about disappeared people, we think about disappeared environments, that these things hold weight and by way of not being seen. So all of these things kind of you know, make it a really interesting thing for me to think through. It's also our sense of smell is it's enigmatic in terms of our ability to experience the world through smell. And I think you know, it's something about, it allows for me for a way to kind of explore the seen and the unseen in some kind of relationship of tension. And perfume itself is a kind of controlled world in which smells are built, much like architecture. They're kind of structured, and it's also it has proclivities towards scientific and poetics, all kind of mixed in together, which also makes it really interesting. I just want to read something here, which I think will also help just to align some of my thinking before we kind of get into projects in particular. And that is to say that I've been exploring perfume also as a kind of sculptural material, to think about its physical presence or its possibility. You know, if we think about an object in the world has, you know, mass, it has weight, it has shape, it has form. And molecular structures have this too, but they have it at this kind of dissipated rate where they get enmeshed with environment and bodies. And it's bodies in particular that are really interesting in relation to this idea, I think, because it's, in a way, we can think about an experience of a smell as a means by which an object enters the body. And it doesn't do this poetically, it does this literally. So when you smell something, molecules enter your nose and hit the receptors and communicate directly with the with your brain. So there's this kind of fusional relationship, and that's not just a conceptual notion. That's not just a way whereby an idea can be expressed through a fragrance or a kind of a construction of molecules to make a fragrance, but that it's it's literally a kind of fusional material. I think also there was something I was thinking about the other day about how people tend to think of you know, of bodies being in an environment, but in actual fact, smell is a way for us to think about the way the environment is inside us. And this I think is also really important as a means of thinking about entanglements and the relationships of materials being dissipated or vanished, and yet still kind of in us, or yeah, and in our lungs and in our noses as a kind of means in which they penetrate our bodies. I did say I was going to read something, wasn't I? I probably won't, but I do really love this quote by Helen Keller, where she talks about smell being a potent wizard as a means of I guess conjuring or calling up things that are from the past. Smell has a really strong association with memory. And so this aspect is also really enticing and interesting to me. That's just a kind of a bit of a preamble, just to give you some sense of my thinking, I guess. And I will now try and address some of that. And I hope I don't repeat myself, but I'll now kind of describe a few projects in which you might see some of this, this thinking played out in an exhibition kind of experience. So let me try and share my screen with you. So that's me there where I was born. Now you know my age. Okay, sorry, 1 minute. Here we go. Okay, so the first exhibition that I am going to walk you through here is called Radiant Matter. It's from 2011 and was shown at Artspace in Auckland, New Zealand. It was a three-part project, and this was the final part of a three-part project that happened across 3 museums in New Zealand, one after the other. This work was first shown in Berlin as part of a residency at the DRD, the Berliner Künstlerprogramm that I did in 2009. So in a sense, the fragrance element of this project was developed at that time. The fragrance that I've made for Bangkok, I have built and constructed myself. It's something that I feel more confident doing, having worked in that space for some time. This work was made with a professional perfume maker whose name is Edmund Rudnitska, and Edmund is in his I guess he'd be in his 60s now, and he was trained by his father. And this is something else I really love about fragrance making, is it's kind of clandestine, it's kind of handed down knowledge. It's and he was trained by his father. Sorry, Michel was the perfumer. Edmund was the father who trained him, who was very, very well-known figure in contemporary perfume, or let's say the modernist era of perfume making, and made some very famous perfumes for the House of Christian Dior, like Diorama and Diorissimo. He invented the accord of the Lily of the Valley, which is a kind of a construction which produces the smell of Lily of the Valley. And I worked with him on this fragrance for this exhibition. This exhibition takes place at Artspace, which is a gallery which has 3 rooms. And this to me seemed like the perfect opportunity to try and think about a fragrance in 3 states of matter, to think about the fragrance as a liquid, as a solid, and as a gas. And so in each of the rooms, it is expressed in one of those ways. So as you walk into the main gallery, you come across what is ostensibly an empty gallery, but for the small mirrored box, which contains an atomizer. The fragrance is atomized inside this box. I was really interested, and I'll talk about what that fragrance is in a minute, but just to talk about it kind of sculpturally or physically, I was really interested in this notion that both as I've mentioned, it penetrates the body, but it also sort of clings to the architecture, or it infiltrates the building. It sort of fills the building. And ostensibly there is a small box in the room, and yet the room contains this form which cannot be held by it. It's somehow that the fragrance is bigger than the room in its gaseous state.
Sorry, Dane, just a quick interruption. We have actually someone from the audience, James. Hi, James. He says he's not able to see the picture of on the screen. I'm sorry, James. Are you able to see it now? Or should we unshare, stop share and reshare? Perhaps?
Should I stop and start again? Can we do that?
Try, because I can't hear.
No, I can see it now. Sorry, it was just at the very start. It was the first frame. I couldn't see anything, but I can see it now.
Right. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm sorry. Sorry to interrupt you. Thanks, James.
Okay. No, hi, James. That's all good. So so this is the room where the fragrance is presented as a gas. And here the perfume is called The Smell of an Empty Space. And it was an attempt to kind of make an olfactory vacuum, a kind of smell of emptiness. Of course, you know, the gallery is the great kind of ideological empty space. You know, the world is exterior to it, and it's an ideological force to imagine the gallery as a kind of vacuum. And so in a way, I was thinking about the sort of deodorized aspect of the gallery and how to think about addressing that as a gas entity in the room. And so the fragrance contains several molecules, and the two most perhaps readily experienceable in the nose. One is a synthetic ozone, and ozone is a naturally occurring chemical. It's a naturally occurring force, and what it kind of reminds me of, and or makes me think of, is something like cartoon air. If you can imagine what the air smells like inside of a, I don't know, like a Tintin cartoon or Asterix. It's like this kind of fake, aerated, spacious, open smell. You would sometimes smell ozone in large cities. You smell it behind fridges. You smell it behind AC machines. It has a kind of a very chemically, it's very chemical and a bit astringent but yet very kind of fresh at the same time. So it gives this kind of aerated experience, and yet it's also kind of heady and a bit headachy. And the other molecule I think that was really important in this work was a citrus, and it's very subtle. But why it seemed important to have a citrus in here was that citrus molecules were very prevalent in fragrance making before they were sort of hijacked by the hygiene industry in the middle of the 20th century, where they started to appear in cleaning products and floor cleaners and house cleaners. So I was interested in the way that it's become a note, it's become a fragrance that is used to somehow disguise former occupancy, and to think about how to kind of clean a space, to empty a space by way of concealing former occupancy seemed like an interesting notion to me. So that's what you experience as you enter this room. The other gallery, two galleries, as I mentioned, this is just another image of that vaporizer in the room. The other is where the fragrance is expressed as a solid. And in some ways, it's the room where it's as a liquid, and in some ways, it's the room with the most kind of physical materials in it. But it's kind of does this quite slippery thing in the space. There are these large G clamps. I use a lot of industrial materials and store-bought objects such as these, and holding up a very large mirror on which sit these small glass objects in which the fragrance is enclosed. So here, the fragrance, the smell of an empty space, is experienced as a liquid held or suspended inside another liquid. Glass is also something I've used in my work a lot. It's, you know, kind of an ancient and modern material simultaneous. It's a liquid and a solid. It can be a divider, a screen. It has all these sorts of propensities that I'm really interested in. The other room where the work is solid, as you approach that room, you see that the light starts to fade towards red, and there is what happens in this room is that there is a mimicking of a dark room, a photographic dark room with the safety light on, with a slow bleed of light from the space on the other side here to the left of the image. And in this room, there are 16 photographic works framed on the wall. And this is photographic paper that is unfixed. It's been sprayed with the perfume, and those images are slowly darkening over the time of the exhibition. The red light controls that to some extent to slow down that process. So in some respects, nothing is solid in the room because everything is moving and changing. There are 16 simply because this is the minimum number of images you would need in order to produce a moving image. So in cinema, it takes 16 frames per second to produce an image, which is a kind of way of making static an event. So that is exactly what's happening in this room. This is what one of those looks like. So they're kind of these explosions or slow kind of bleeds of one liquid hitting a chemical and causing a reaction and then slowly changing over time. The next show, I'll keep moving here, just keep an eye on the time. This is Let Us Take the Air from 2015, also in Auckland, New Zealand. And this exhibition, again, we're dealing with quite an empty gallery, a very kind of austere experience in one respect, but a kind of heady one in another. And Let Us Take the Air was an exhibition that continued a long-standing fascination with scent, focused here on two substances associated with the processes of remembering and forgetting, of awareness and disengagement. And the primary material of the exhibition, again, scent and vapor, and these were conceived as molecule kind of sculptures again. So one of those works is called Concentrated Form of Loss, Alpha Ionone, Beta Ionone. And it's located in a liminal or edge space of the gallery. I cut a hole in the roof of the gallery and built a ladder that takes the viewer up into the roof space, into the attic, which is a kind of storehouse in many respects, a place that we might put, you know, old memories, photo albums and the like. And this scent of alpha ionone, I'll just read this actually, it'll be easier. The scent contains molecules inherent in the smell of the violet flower, which is believed to cause anosmia, the temporary inability to perceive smell. Known for their elusive and fleeting scent, the presence of ionones in a violet's chemical makeup temporarily desensitizes the receptors of the nose, preventing any further scent being detected until the nerves recover. The recovery is momentary. Receptors switch on and off. And because the brain hasn't registered the violet scent in the preceding few moments, it is registered as a new stimulus each time. So what this ionone does is this beautiful thing where you are constantly having this new experience every time you have it. And in the history of fragrance making, violet has always been described as a top note, a short-lived note. And that is simply because it has this propensity through its chemical makeup of having these ionones to switch the receptors on and off. So you're constantly having this kind of remembering and forgetting, remembering and forgetting. It's also a very old-fashioned scent. It reminded a lot of people of, you know, their grandmas. And so what the ladder also allowed me to do was sort of control the viewing experience so that the work is only viewable by one person at a time. So viewers climb the ladder, and in the roof is a piece of paper that is sprayed daily with the fragrance, and they smell this violet, this flower in the attic. I will skip this part of the work simply to keep to allow enough time to keep discussing. But this is two vaporizers, and these contain two homeopathic formulas that I produced with a homeopath. And one is a formula that is prescribed to help your memory, and the other one is prescribed to help you forget. So it's the intermingling of forgetting and remembering as a vapor in the gallery, and they slowly dissipate. And on the other side of the wall sit the two containers with remembering and forgetting. And this is the alpha ionone on the wall that you can see as a molecular diagram. So this project here, I will also discuss a little bit as a means to kind of address that interest in homeopathy, but kind of widen it out a little bit and to think about another exhibition that uses molecules and vapors. And it's an exhibition called All Whatness is Wetness. And it's a show that I made in 2015 at Reber von Stenglen Gallery in Zurich in Switzerland. And the title is actually a kind of, it's not a quote, but it exists for many hundreds of years as a way to succinctly describe the beliefs of a philosopher, an early Greek philosopher named Thales, who was alive around 550 BC. Excuse my slight incorrection there. It might be 650. And he was a materialist, but he was also a monist. So he believed in one kind of creational form, but he was a materialist. So in a way, he represents a division between, let's say, a kind of a myth-based way of understanding, or let's say a belief-based religious way of understanding the creation. And he was thinking about the world as a material structure and what it is that he saw. So he actually also kind of represents the dividing line in a sense between, he's sort of often talked about as the first person to have used the scientific method of, observation. And he looked at the world, and what he came to the conclusion of was that everything originated as one material. And he said that one material was water. Now he's incorrect in actual fact, but in another sense, we are predominantly water, as is the planet. So there's a kind of beautiful truth also embedded in his thinking. And so what he is kind of attributed with saying or thinking is that all whatness is wetness, all thingness is moisture. And he did this by seeing moisture on rocks in the morning, seeing it on his breath, noticing that things condensed. He lived in a village called Miletus in modern day Turkey that was on a river, which is an important kind of trade route. The ocean also was a main conduit and connector of trade, of ideas. And so, water held a kind of a very kind of prominent position in his world. And what was super beautiful in thinking about him and thinking about moisture and wetness in relation to its kind of its origin through his thinking is that he lived in Miletus, and the river that runs through that village, which is now a ruin, the river is called the Meander, and it's where the word originates. And this idea of meandering, of drifting with an idea of drifting with a thought of meandering, is exactly because this river meanders in such an elongated fashion. And so I traveled to Miletus, to the ruins, and I collected water from that river, from the Meander, and then I smuggled it back into Switzerland in my suitcase, 20 liters of it. I had 4 5-liter containers, and I lay a t-shirt on top of it and dragged it in through customs without, I probably shouldn't say, I'll shut up now, James. Here is a photograph of me collecting that river water. This is the containers that I used. And I took that river water back to Switzerland, and I installed an atomizer in the floor of the gallery in a grate. It's an old garage, beautiful, simple space, and slowly started to vaporize that water over the course of the exhibition. I also produced the homeopathic method to that water. I don't want to go into that too much because we'll run out of time, but let's just say it's a really interesting system of understanding or misunderstanding material and where material starts and stops. One of the fundamental underlying beliefs or ideas in homeopathy, which comes from science, it was invented by a physician, is that like cures like, that you take the thing that causes an ailment, and that also you would you gain strength through dilution. And this to me was very much aligned with my thinking about molecules and things dissipating out, having more effect, that somehow through something diluting, something being less present, it has more power. And so this work here is the vapor kind of rising out and creating sort of a wetness all over the floor. And these are the containers of the Meander river water that were slowly depleted over the course of the exhibition. There are also a series of diagrams that start to kind of unpack, or let's say describe some of those processes. And this is a diagram of a water molecule. So it's simply H2O. You can see here it says oxygen on one of these rings and the other two are hydrogen. So it's a water molecule diagram that hangs from the roof of the gallery. I'll just flick through this one very quickly so we can land on to Bangkok to talk about that work. I think I'm doing pretty well time-wise, Kim.
Yes, okay.
And And that is to say that this is just to flick through this very quickly. This is a project from 2017, 2018 that was exhibited at the Mori Art Museum in Tokyo and also at the Auckland Art Gallery here in Auckland. It's called Iris, Iris, Iris. And there were sort of two elements to this project, but it was really an exploration of the iris as a fragrance, but also to think about the connection, the poetic and linguistic connection between the iris, the flower, and the iris in our eyeball, and the way that this might be a means to kind of pull together, let's say, sight and smell, or the kind of entanglement of two senses, two bodily senses. And so I worked with an amazing company in Tokyo called Takasago. They're an 80-year-old fragrance and flavors company, and they have some incredible technology. And I worked with their with their scientists to produce this work. And what I used was an amazing technology they have called Headspace Technology. And what Headspace Technology allows one to do is to take an object, a flower in traditional, let's say in traditional fragrance production, and enclose that flower in let's say a glass bell jar, and to then remove the volatile molecules, the air around the flower, and then analyze that in a GC and then rebuild that in a laboratory. So it allows you to sort of entrap the molecules rising off forms. And so this was, of course, incredibly interesting to me, and it's something I hope to work with again. And so what I did was I entrapped the smell of 3 irises, and we produced a fragrance from that. These 2 large blue platforms on the floor of the gallery here are where that entrapment takes place in the exhibition. It's enacted in the exhibition as well as having been done as part of the production of the work to produce the fragrance. And the 3 irises you see here are the iris flower in this large stemmed glass bell, which is having the smell of it slowly entrapped in the material that allows the Headspace technology to work. Here it is here as a kind of detail. And then there is also this umbrella, which is a copy of my iris. It's called a Janome umbrella, which is a snake eye umbrella. And it was produced by a company in Japan that have been making these for over 350 years. And it's an exact replica of the color of my eyeball, produced as an umbrella, a snake eye umbrella. And these were used by priests and doctors traditionally, which I loved. Again, this sort of relationship between belief and science. And this glass object captures the smell of that object in order for it to be reproduced. The other is a camera lens. Camera lenses also contain irises, and these are another form of seeing, of entrapping the world through image making. And this lens, as you can see, maybe on the image, I hope it says it's an Olympus. And an Olympus it's a Japanese-made lens, but it's also the name of the mountain to which the goddess Iris was a messenger. So in Greek mythology, the goddess Iris was a messenger to Mount Olympus, to the other gods. And so there was this lovely connection there with this lens as well. So the smell of this is also entrapped. And there is this work on the wall, leaning against the wall, these blue sticks, which I'll explain in a moment. And this is the fragrance that we produced that is slowly turning in a vortex, which connects quite nicely to a part of the work in Bangkok. And so this is, as a liquid, it's slowly churning, hidden under this object, embedded in this concrete form as a piece of technology that creates a vortex in that liquid. So it's in this continual state of agitation or becoming, or in enmeshment, where these molecules are all continuously churning and turning. This is, and we're just jumping to the Auckland exhibition, where it might be easier just to see the other work. These are images. This piece of material over this form is an image of my eyeball taken by an iridologist, who is a doctor who studies the eye as a kind of map of the body to find ailment. And these were images made of my 10-year-old self's eyeballs. My mother took me to an iridologist when I was a kid and kept the 35mm slides. And I made these as silks. And then the perfumes are vaporized under these forms. And the other work on the wall is a work that I made with a company named Shuedo. They are have been around for hundreds of years in Japan, making incense. And incense was originally used in China as a timekeeping device. And I was really interested in the way that it might be a measure of time through becoming nothing. You know, so it goes up in smoke in order to measure something that is also vanishing. So the work is this kind of large physical object that slowly depletes over time. Each one of these sticks represents a day. It takes about 8 hours for these to burn. It's hard to tell the scale here, but they sit at about 800 to a meter in height. So they're really oversized. And of course they produce a very strong iris smell in the room. And again, it's like you walk into the gallery and your head is kind of full of iris. So your irises are kind of taking in this large, quite optical object as you walk past it. It sort of flits and moves in the eye, given that these are all slightly, you know, they're all handmade. So there's this kind of movement as you pass them. So yeah, that takes us into to Bangkok, to the respiratory event, the vapor whale, how to vaporize a whale, which was the seductive title of the presentation that Kim and I concocted. How do you vaporize a whale? Well, how do I describe this? Okay. So what let me just pull up some images. It might be easier to sort of think about the space first and foremost. So Kim and I worked through several different spaces. And of course that always informs the work. I say, of course, I mean, for me, it does. Thinking about the way that the space might allow for an experience for the viewer, but also the way, but both the way that the work might be experienced, i.e., you know, how it is that you move past the works, or how the work encounters your body or enters your body in the case of a smell. And this rooftop was just all too beautiful and seductive for me to pass by. I really loved this idea that we were on the roof, and what I proposed doing was to try and think about this this actuality, i.e. vaporizing a whale, but also how that is a kind of beautiful poetic notion, that somehow to think about an object as large and formidable as an 80-ton whale being somehow vaporized on a rooftop and spreading itself thin across a city seemed like an incredibly beautiful poetic act to me. I think one of the reasons I was really interested in whales is that they are, you know, enigmatic by nature. They are somehow hidden from us, and yet they kind of live in our imagination more than they do for us in any other way. The sperm whale in particular is, you know, the stuff of legends connecting to Moby Dick. To think about the sperm whale as also it's the creature, the creature with the largest brain to have ever, you know, being on this planet. It's also a creature that creates the loudest noise of anything that we know of. And so it's this kind of formidable, huge 80-ton object, larger than a city bus. And yet it's somehow hidden from us in the depths of the ocean. And so to think about it as a kind of airborne event, as something that might spread thin across the city, was really interesting. I'm just going to turn my page here so I can have some notes in front of me, because of course this is also new work. So I'm also sort of thinking about it. But the way that you vaporize a whale is to think about, what I used was, I produced a fragrance, And it's a combination of several molecules. It's a combination of a synthetic, and this is kind of important to the work, I think. It's a combination of a synthetic and a natural. And synthetics and naturals are used in fragrance making all the time, or a combination thereof. And this fragrance makes use of two molecules, one synthetic and one natural. And these are both ambergris. And ambergris is a waste product of the whale, of the sperm whale in particular. It is produced in the belly of the whale. It's a waste product that it excretes into the ocean, and it's an waxy oil, and it doesn't mix with the water, doesn't mix with the seawater, and it sits on the ocean as an oil and congeals and dries and washes up on beaches. And it's been used for hundreds of years as a fragrance material. It's a kind of fixative. It's a material used in fragrance making to create longevity for other smells. It sort of allows other scents to kind of attach to it to give it a longer life. It does have a fragrance. I often describe it as being kind of leathery and milky. It's both kind of attractive and repulsive at the same time, which is also a kind of a beautiful, I think, binary proposition that I'm really interested in. So this is an ambergris that's vaporized over the city of Bangkok. And it's a mix of a synthetic ambergris that's produced in a laboratory, which is what's used mostly now in fragrance making. And it also uses a natural ambergris that was collected on a beach in the South Island of Aotearoa, New Zealand. Ambergris is known to be found on beaches, and people trade in it. It has a high value by gram, and these are combined and then vaporized over the ocean. As I mentioned, it's been used for hundreds of years in perfumery, and in ancient Egyptians also used it as an incense. And during the Black Death in Europe, people believed that carrying ambergris could prevent contagion, which seemed like an interesting kind of connection to what we're all grappling with at the moment. So the whale, I'll talk about the whale in relationship to one of the other objects on the roof, but I'll just kind of walk you through the kind of practicalities of that vaporization. So it takes place in these two forms that you see, these two geometric, quite formal objects. They're air duct-like objects. They are powder coated in a paint that sort of gives them the, I guess for me anyway, they sort of started to look a bit like oil slicks or petroleum. They have a kind of a double effect, like as you walk around them, they sort of change tone a little bit, but they have a kind of slight luminescence like petroleum. And these are kind of, I guess, sculptural imaginings of air ducts. They are the same shape, but one is turned upside down and has an opening at one end and the other at the other. So they're kind of inversions of one another. There are two on the roof. One of them you see here front on has a large opening with a fan at the back and a vaporizer, an object called a Venturi Vaporizer at the front. This is another detailed image of that. And so as the viewer sort of moves in front of this object, they are kind of hit by this fragrance, this smell of the whale. Of course, it's dissipating out over the city and vanishing and spreading thin, but it's also entering the body as you stand in front. Here's another detail of that object. So this is what that Venturi Vaporizer is. Basically, air is blown in, it creates a vacuum which pulls the liquid up and shatters those liquid molecules against the side of this glass object, and they arise out of the top as a vapor and then are pushed out by the fan across the city. What I also loved about the roof is that there were these other air ducts and AC units all behind the work. So in a sense, the work is also sort of metabolized by all these other sorts of air conditioning units or machines to control the conditions of air. Again, you know, I would reiterate some of those ideas or remind you of those ideas rather than reiterate them that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk about the way that I think smell plays a really interesting role in thinking about the way environments exist inside bodies, as well as opposed to just our bodies existing in those environments. The other element on the roof here, which is a replica. It's a replica of the skull of a life-size adult sperm whale, and it sits in its container. And this was a decision I made early on, and I really wanted the work not to be, I guess, not to be narrativized by being this experience where you walk onto the roof and you see this skull and you start to kind of put together a notion of how it is that this came to be here, and you know, what happened, or what kind of fiction is being kind of drawn out by this object being on this roof. What the crate does for me is although it's, you know, I'm not in control of it aesthetically, it's a crate that the skull came in from the factory that produced this, which I'll talk about in a minute. But it clearly indicates that it came from somewhere, that it's a kind of construction, that it's a fabrication, that it's a synthetic. Again, to think about this natural synthetic kind of entanglement, which I think is at the center of this work in many respects. So the skull sits on the roof, and you sort of approach it from the back, from the base of the skull of the whale, and then you move around to the front, and then you're kind of confronted with this huge jaw of this sperm whale, and the shape of the sperm whale's head is such that the bulkhead of the whale was where the spermaceti was, which was a waxy oil that was highly valued during the era of whaling. And what scientists believe the shape of the skull also allowed was for the sound that the whale produced, its calling, the sound that it made, to kind of bounce off this object like a kind of an acoustic chamber that pushed that sound back out away from the skull to increase its efficacy. So this whale was produced by a company that make skeletons for museums, for museum displays. And this was really interesting to me. I would like to talk about it in relationship to another project, the project I made for the Venice Biennale, but I won't. And what I will instead do is try to address it directly. And that is to say that in my thinking about whales and thinking about these large, beautiful animals that, you know, that are kind of enigmatic and hidden from us, that what occurred to me in my research is that whales themselves, actual whales, not this replica, but actual whales, they are sentient toxic events. They are living toxic events. And this is a really kind of bleak truth. And that is that whales live for so long, and they feed in such a manner, and they live in such environments that have been polluted by humans to such an extent that they are ingesting the world. They are an atmosphere in many respects. They are also an atmosphere that has become polluted. So for example, when a beluga whale is beached, it is declared a toxic event because it's the levels of mercury and poisons in its system are so great that it is deemed to be toxic. You know, like I was reading about the milk of mothers in your communities that are sanctioned to whale for traditional upkeep of tradition. Their milk is some of the most polluted material that's ingested by humans by way of whale meat being so poisonous. So what kind of occurred to me is that this propensity for humans to replicate the world, to copy nature, which is a kind of sculptural ground zero, you know, the first sculptures are of copies of nature, of things of the world, of ourselves. And that this idea that somehow the connection between the natural world and the synthetic, or the polluted and the unpolluted, is sort of more entangled than we like to imagine. And that this synthetic copy produced in a factory for a museum display is somehow sits closer to the actual whale than we might otherwise assume. Whales, when we use them as material, like for burning in lamps and for lubricating motors, when whaling was industrialized, whales were industrial objects, and now in our protection of them, the environment in which they live is such that they are a kind of self-contained industrial pollutant, which is a kind of a bleak truth. And so in a way, there's this sort of it's an uneasy mix, a kind of coming together, a hybrid of a synthetic molecule and a natural molecule, a vaporized whale, an imagined whale, and then a kind of replicated whale that sits on the roof. So yeah, that's some of the ways that I've been thinking about the project. I think also, there's something about the fact that actual whales and these replicas are both kind of creatures of late capitalism is also sort of very interesting, that somehow they are products both in their actual state and in their synthesized, copied versions, somehow both creatures of a world that we find ourselves in. So in many respects, that's a really kind of bleak proposition. But I also wanted to say that in relation to the Biennale itself and its title, Escape Routes, I think that there is some kind of form of hope in terms of this kind of proposition, and that is to think about the importance of reciprocal relations in the world, and that reciprocal relations with the built and the natural world seem to me to be kind of escape routes, that somehow if we are more attuned to the built or the human produced world and the natural world and the connections between them, that this kind of, that an escape is not a means of leaving, but it's a means of paying attention. And so for me, working with a kind of strange factory that produce copies of nature at the expense of nature, alongside thinking about this kind of beautiful enigmatic form that's dissipated out over Bangkok as a fragrance that might, penetrate the nose of an unsuspecting viewer or smeller, is a kind of way of thinking about the reciprocity between an artwork and a viewer, between the natural and the synthetic, between an experience and a form, a phenomena and a material. So I'm going to stop talking because it's otherwise, we are kind of going to.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you so much. I think it's fantastic to hear you speak about all these books. I mean, as much as scent aroma is very hard to place or speak about, right? It's something that really needs experiencing. So are many of your works that really deal with scent, and of course hearing your ideas behind all these projects is really amazing for us to also understand better in terms of how we would approach such a slippery concepts, matter, so to speak. But also, so when we are speaking about also the poetic act that this work really encapsulates in some ways, is also for me, what's also beautiful about it is also this evergreen, this matter that we are working with, that you are working with actually, the work, it passes through this really this gigantic creature that is also elusive, but is voluminous, and then at the same time through releasing them, vaporizing it and releasing it into a city. If we also imagine the city as a living organism as well, It's atmosphere into atmosphere into atmosphere. And this how it then dissipates, or when we also then perhaps pulling also the idea of how it dilutes, but at the same time this relation happens, right, in many ways that somehow can only be, are also very personal, intimate experiences of each and every person who experienced the work. And then from us afar, remotely looking at it, smell, aroma being such a slippery concept, is also a space for imagination that opens up as well many ways of reading it, and all these many layers that you just talked about. We are a little bit over time, but I believe we can have a few minutes for questions. If there are questions, a reminder that you can post your questions in the Q&A. So far, I haven't had any, but perhaps, Dane, if you allow me some time, and for everyone else here, I really am also curious to find out. I mean, I was talking about smell as a very core medium in a lot of your works. Smell has this immediacy, right? If you occupy the same space, you are confronted with it. You can't turn away from it as a visual or more material form. But in the recent times, COVID pandemic, when we are not able to travel, perhaps for those who are not able to experience these works, or even for any works in person. So the connection is through virtual digital realms, which is odorless, right? How has that changed also the way you think about the medium? Or
I mean, in some respects, it makes me more. To me, it feels that those real experiences, those bodily experiences, those physical encounters, are more vital than ever, because they're so unavailable. So for me, I think, it makes me more inclined towards thinking into the space of a physical encounter. However, that's not possible in so many respects right now. And so what I do also really love is the way that in the same way that the work can only be encountered through a proximity, the work it also exists as a kind of an imagining. So there's this quite lovely kind of democratization of those experiences across a physical, a virtual, an imagined, and a conceptual. So all of those forms of the work are kind of equalized or democratized, and I like that aspect. That somehow the idea, the description, the image, the scent, and then in the same way that the whale is never present in the work, maybe it sort of aligns to that in a way. The whale's never there. Like the whale's always gone. It's the whale's skull. The whale's not there. It's a copy. The fragrance is moving away from you. It's vanishing. So maybe that's enough on that. I won't go on too much, but I hope that answers that kind of in some sense.
Right. And if we could answer one question, perhaps before we round up, is from James. He would like you to talk about the challenges about being not able to be there in Bangkok for the installation. Time you're not around? And
sorry?
Is that the first time you're not physically present for the installation of your work?
I have been absent before during install for things, but yeah, this is like nothing else. I can't think of anything that's quite like it. I mean, just to think that I'll never get to kind of be in front of the work in the way that it's currently installed is a kind of, that's a sad truth that I have to live with. That's okay. I will get over it, but I'm disappointed I don't get to. But what would I say about the difficulties? I mean, it turns out that you can be jet lagged without going anywhere. That's something I learned. Staying up all night on WhatsApp and various other kind of apps to communicate, to get things kind of rolling, and staying up all night to do so meant that there were a few days I was like, oh my God, I think I'm jet lagged. I haven't been anywhere. But you know, what it does, I mean, I work a lot with other people. So I work with glass blowers, I work with fabricators, I work with fragrance makers. I also should thank the company in Thailand that helped me realize the scent. They sent me molecules. I worked through some compositions, settled on a final composition, sent them ambergris, and then they produced the fragrance to the volume required for the length of the exhibition. So I really thank them for their amazing help throughout this process. So the point being that I work a lot with other people. So I'm always at a slight distance to my work, which in a way is, in a sense, it's a means of having a kind of a healthy relationship with what I do. Many people want to be really kind of inside things, but I actually quite enjoy the distance that working with other people's skills allows me. It sort of gives me a kind of a full of sense of the work without getting, it's not about not getting caught up in the details, because I'm probably a terrible micromanager and annoying to work with, but it allows me to kind of step back from things at the same time as be inside them. What I also would say about the experience and the difficulties is that one of the really positive things is it makes me realize how incredibly competent, not just the team in Bangkok, who I can't commend enough for their incredible, astute kind of attention to detail and patience working through this with me. But that, that there's just an amazing array of skilled people who care, that care about the realization of projects like the Bangkok Biennale, that care about the realization of artists' work that they hadn't otherwise encountered, hadn't met before. And so just that kind of, I guess, that community of people that it takes to produce something like the Biennale is really, that's something that I really kind of cherish in this experience, is that it kind of opens up your eyes to just how many people it takes to produce something like this. So yeah, in a weird way, it's quite I guess I have quite a positive read on it in many respects, but I'm also really sad not to be there.
So actually, would you, would you not want to repeat the same kind of experience, given that, the situation that is evolving may not end so soon, and whether that, would change also in the immediate term projects that you're doing, and not being physically present in terms of how then these projects would be generated. I believe I interpreted your second part of the question correctly, James. Yeah.
So, I think I got the gist of that. Sorry, it was
sorry.
It's okay.
So whether it has changed your idea around whether you would have to be physically present to install projects.
It's also a great indicator of why a curator like him is great to work with, because there's a sort of shared oversight, both of us being at a distance to the work and kind of sharing the kind of a communication around the work and how it's spatially realized. I feel really buoyed by the possibility of working remotely. I mean, I have done it before. Like I remember when I was in South Korea, and I had a show in New Zealand opening like at this more or less the same time, and those dates couldn't be shifted on either side. And being in a hotel kind of at night, installing in one country via Skype or something, and being in another, and there's a kind of there's a way around it. I just think that being in the space and with the work is just, it can't be that can't be undervalued as a means of thinking with the body, or thinking through an experience that you're trying to allow a viewer to have. But I mean, it's doable, that's for sure. We did it.
That's very true.
That's the other thing. It's like, I'm not alone in that experience, and maybe that's it too, that it's a shared thing. Maybe if you're the only one, it's like, ugh, how am I going to make this work?
But I suppose also, especially with your work, I suppose that not having that physical presence, say while we're positioning the various components, to feel it ourselves, to experience it ourselves on site, does change some aspects of that process when we're thinking about. We are basically, for me at least, half imagining how it would feel for a viewer, for example. But
I mean, in many respects, that's where the work starts. Like it starts as an image in the head, right? It starts as an idea. So in another way, it's a kind of it sort of just continues in that space. It's sort of like it lives up in here. It's like, that's where it started, and that's where it started to take shape. And so not being there, it sort of still lives up in here for me. Yeah. And
on that note, I suppose we should wrap up again. Let me thank everyone for being with us. Thank you, Dane, for joining us, despite it being very late at night where you are. And again, I do want to also thank at the end the BAB team for all the organizations, for all the process, for all the pain in not being able to be there, but also being so supportive and making all these attempts to understand the concepts behind the work and then help us realize it finally where it is. Thank you again to Creative New Zealand, to New Zealand Embassy for supporting Dane's participation, because that really helped in many ways. Well, we are towards the end of the Biennale. If you have not seen the work, I do encourage you, please go have a look. It's a work that really, you need to occupy the same space with the work to really, experience it in full. But of course, like us, for those who are not in Bangkok, it can still live in your head in different ways. So thank you, everyone, for joining us again. Thank you, Dane, and everybody else. And well, have a good evening. I see you somewhere around the world.
Thank you so much for your time. And
thank you.
For listening, I guess. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.